Good evening, everyone. Let me do that again. This is a communication school. Good evening, everyone. Okay, good. Now we're a real communications and journalism school. I want to thank all of you for coming this evening. It really is great to see our students here, our supporters from the community, our alums, current graduate students and undergraduates, and of course our special guests. And our keynote presenters, Alex Cohen and A Martinez, who are co-hosts of 89.3 KPCC's Take Two. So we're especially delighted to have them this evening. And we're going to say a bit more about our illustrious guests. I do have to say that this annual event is a personal pleasure, a special occasion for all of the students, the faculty, and friends. And I always enjoy it because it addresses the issue of public broadcasting, and I have a warm place in my heart for that, having served on the board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for more than a decade and for a while as chair. And I have to say, we're supposed to be balanced. We like TV, we like radio, but the radio side of it still warms the cockles of my heart more than the TV side. Except for Downton Abbey, for which I'm a complete sucker. This event was established by the late Russ Smith as a way to honor the legacy of an extraordinary professional, the late James Loper, who had a distinguished career, was admired by many, and served as mentor to our students, and also, I will say, served as a mentor to me, a friend and a mentor. And I think that speaks to the affection that many of my faculty members have for his presence here. Mrs. Loper is with us tonight, and I would like to recognize her and acknowledge her, thank her for her support and ideas. So if we could give her a round of applause. In fact, we were sitting together, and she said, I've got a couple of good ideas for you. So I took out my pen and wrote down the good ideas that came, so I do appreciate that. This event was established by the late Russ Smith as a way to honor the legacy of James Loper, as I mentioned. He was the founder and president of KCET, so he had a very broad career, and also the founding chairman of the board of PBS. So it really was an extraordinary nationwide career. He participated at USC Annenberg in a number of ways, ranging from advisory work to board member to professor. And I do remember coming in the evening, because he usually taught in the evening, and we would sit down and talk about the importance of public broadcasting. And he was a very popular and supportive teacher. By continuing to highlight others who have made a positive impact in public broadcasting, we pay tribute to Jim Loper's wisdom, his leadership, and his impact. Since its inception in 2005, the Loper Lecture has featured prominent leaders from broadcasting, public broadcasting especially, such as Guy Raz, Tavis Smiley, and Judy Woodruff. This lecture series is just one example for us of how community and diversity play a critical role in our work at USC Annenberg. Just last year, I'm very proud to announce and to mention again that we established a new institution, the IDEA, the Institute for Diversity and Empowerment at Annenberg, which has done a tremendous amount of work looking at the representation of women and people of color, especially in Hollywood, but also is very active in launching experiences inside the school as well. I'm delighted that Alex and A will help us celebrate the Loper legacy and the powerful impact of public service broadcasting. And for the students who are in the audience, you have an assignment. And I'm the dean, so you got to do this. I want you to pay more and more attention to public broadcasting amongst all the other media opportunities that you have. There will be a test. We haven't quite figured out yet how to do that, but there will be a test. But it's also a great place to work. It's really cutting edge. It serves the people of the United States. Without the kind of press that public broadcasting or the kind of content of journalism, of information in the public interest that is produced by these stations, then American democracy would suffer. Without information in the public interest, democracy cannot flourish. And so public broadcasting, day in, day out, year in and year out, provides a service that no one else provides. So in addition to listening, even though you're young people, you students, write checks. You know, you get a mug, you get various other things, but the main thing is you also contribute directly to democracy in the United States of America. And so to kick off today's conversation is Willa Seidenberg, who is professor in our School of Journalism and director of Annenberg Radio News. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Professor Seidenberg. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
I'm not used to being called professor. And I was glad to see that you had your glasses in your hands, because as my students all know, my glasses are not usually on my face, except when I have to read. So I'm really particularly happy to be hosting this event, because KPCC and Take Two in particular are part of my daily consumption. I'm obviously a big public radio fan, and not only do I listen to KPCC every day, but they take money out of my checkbook every month. So I'm very committed to public broadcasting, and I enjoy the show tremendously. I heard an interview with the musician Moby a few months ago, and it was really interesting because he talked about how he had moved here from New York about 5 years ago, and he was talking about the creativity that is in Los Angeles as opposed to New York, that he really feels like this has become a very vibrant, creative place. And because I'm one of these LA boosters, I'm not a native, but it's my adopted home, and I'm an LA booster. And so I was like, oh, this is good ammunition. And he was talking about how LA can be a very double-edged sword. And he said, and I'm going to quote him, "You point to almost every good thing about LA, and there's a bad thing attached to it. LA has probably the best public radio in the world. One of the reasons for that is that we spend a lot of time in our cars." So it's true, but it is true that we have the best public radio in the country. And I heard that interview on KPCC's Take Two. That was an interview that Alex did with Moby. And so I get a lot of mileage out of this, because I get to repeat this to people, to my students, to parties and whatnot. So I get a lot of my ammunition from Take Two. And I'd also like to point out that Megan LARSON is an alum of our school. She went to our graduate school, and she is now the senior producer of Take Two. So we have a deep connection. We have a lot of students who intern at KPCC. So we have a very deep connection here at Annenberg with KPCC. So it's my privilege to introduce Alex Cohen and A Martinez. For those of you, I'm sure most of you know, but it airs every weekday on KPCC from 9 to 11. Alex is also the host of Take Two's new sister podcast called The Brood, is that right? And The Wheel Thing. Before she joined KPCC, Southern California Public Radio, in 2009, she was a host and a reporter for NPR's Day to Day, which is, I think, where I first met you. You've also heard her work on Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Marketplace. So she's been around public radio, as she was telling the students earlier, for a long time, and she's won a lot of journalistic awards, including LA Press Club's Best Radio Anchor Prize, which is well-deserved. And the fun thing that I love about Alex is that she was on a roller derby team called the LA Derby Dolls, and her alter ego was Axels of Evil. I don't know how many of you knew that, but she co-authored a book, Down in Derby, The Insider's Guide to Roller Derby. So you can just kind of have that picture when she's up here. And A. Martinez, before he began hosting Take Two, he was a sports talk radio broadcaster for ESPN and hosting 710 KSPN's In the Zone, as well as Dodger Talk and Laker Line. So he didn't get to be a center fielder on a baseball team, but he is part of Take Two. He attended LA City College before he transferred to the journalism school at Cal State Northridge. And we're so fortunate to have them here, and I'd like to welcome them up.
We're sitting.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
We sit for the radio.
This is really late in our day. We're up at well before dawn. We're sitting. I, first of all, want to say thank you so much for everyone to show up tonight, especially the students. I know many of you are probably on deadlines. You're super busy. You're stressed out. You're thinking about getting that piece filed on time. So thank you for coming out, and thank you to Ernie for having us out this evening. This is such a beautiful facility, and the work that you're doing here is really exciting. So it's truly an honor for us to be here. But Take Two, and it's funny, we were just talking upstairs with some of Willa's students about how did we wind up doing what we do. And I would say if there were a blueprint to follow about, like, how do you make a daily 2-hour live radio show that appeals to a wide and diverse range of audiences, there is no playbook, and if there was one, we would totally have not followed it at all. We're kind of a band of misfits that started off in the most odd way possible.
But now we have the rights to it, though, because we've been doing it. So.
Yes, exactly.
No one
We'll
can
not
tell
let anyone
us.
see that playbook. But it's not just about us. It's about the staff, including Megan Larson, the USC alum who's at the helm. We have a really incredible group of people. I like to brag about the fact, because journalism that these days loves to talk about diversity, but it's a lot of talking and not an actual amount of practice. I'm a white person and I'm a minority on my staff. That's huge. And I feel deeply honored to be able to be a minority. It's been way too long on the other side of the spectrum. So since all of our gang can't be here tonight, because many of them are hard at work or about to go to bed because they have to wake up in a couple of hours, we brought in a little video that was made earlier this year that gives you a sense of what life is like behind the scenes. So let's take a look at that.
Okay, guys, let's talk about the show today. This flood at UCLA is just bonkers, the water main break. So it'd be nice to talk to somebody at UCLA about the flood.
Take Two is an interesting mix of a lot of different cool stuff.
How a nearly century-old pipe caused traffic headaches and left the school's storied basketball court under 8 inches of water.
I think that we like to show the real LA. I think a lot of times in the media and unfortunately even on public radio, there's this image of what LA is.
We want to interest people in the stories that we're talking about.
Anybody who lives here knows that we're much bigger and broader and deeper than that, and I like to think that we really tap into that side of Los Angeles.
Today, as an example, I'm working on Governor Brown is in Mexico, so I tend to do a lot of segments that cover the Central America or different immigrant communities in Los Angeles.
Got here at 6. I'm working right now on this story of a woman in Mexico whose son was killed by Border Patrol. So trying to get a legal expert on it to see kind of what kind of a case she might have.
We're producing a really high-quality radio show every day, but we're producing it with a Western sensibility rather than a sort of an East Coast one.
Got in at 6 o'clock, been up since 4:45, and right now I'm working on, I do a regular segment called App Chat, and I'm working on a piece on Kim Kardashian's free video game. Kim Kardashian has a huge app, and I'm covering it.
I prepare the script, kind of getting a sense of what's going on for the week and also for the day, and then just try and incorporate any sound that goes with it too.
Everyone thinks that A. Martinez is the sports guy, and that's true. There's no doubt about that. I also really enjoy sports. I just like different sports from most people. Huge fan of sumo wrestling, rugby, women's roller derby.
Our perspectives come from two different ways of growing up, two different trains of thought on everything from politics, from the way we see sports. It's a nice little Venn diagram where there's not a lot in the middle, but the stuff that's in the middle we get to share and hopefully share with our listeners. So we are an odd couple in that way, but an odd couple that really likes being odd together.
There's another studio that the news is coming out of, so I'm talking with them with this machine, and I can also talk with these guys, and then with Megan upstairs.
Incredible deluge. 10 million gallons of water flood the UCLA campus. About 8 to 10 million gallons of water were lost before the line was eventually shut off more than 3 hours later.
Mark Gold is acting director of the UCLA Institute of Environment and Sustainability. Mark, thanks a lot. Yeah, you were on campus when all this happened yesterday, and given what you know about LA's plumbing, how surprised were you that there was a 30-footer near your office?
It's funny how the shows, sometimes from the inside, they look a little bit chaotic, and we had a few moments of confusion and, things that we had to change up, but I think it was a good show.
I mean, it's one of the most cohesive groups that I've ever worked with. We work together, we play together.
When this whole thing started, I remember Bill Davis, our president, said you can't really judge a show until you give it at least 2 years. Well, now we're there. We're at 2 years. And I think the one thing you can judge is that this thing has legs. It has legs, we're running, we're sprinting, but we know exactly what we're doing and we know where we want to be. And now, the rest of the track is just ours to kind of grab onto and win that race.
We have legs, but our hair shifted.
That's right.
Oh,
Hers got
mine
shorter.
came off and it went to
Mine,
your face.
yeah, it all shifted over here. And what you saw in that video there is a big reason why I love being on this show and why I think we're very different. You saw people's different faces, different colors of faces, different age ranges, different perspectives. So when we have our show meeting every day, one of the things that I know that we do is cover every possible angle of life in Los Angeles, life in California, life on the West Coast. You heard one of our producers say that we take this show with a West Coast perspective, and that's something that you don't really see in media, especially national media or even public radio. It's all East Coast based, East Coast centered, or East Coast perspective, and that's the one thing that I think we do uniquely more than any other show is to give the perspective of the people that live in the area, our community. That's our mission. Our mission, not just for the show, but for KPCC, is to be that show for this area, and I think that's what we do a really good job at.
Yeah. And the other thing that's different is that if you've listened to other shows in public radio, especially shows that are generated out of the East Coast, we are not the only co-hosted show in town. But there is this tendency sometimes of there's a host, and that host will do an interview, and then another host will do an interview, and they could be in the same room but still sound like they're thousands of miles
Here's what
apart.
it looks like. There.
Yeah, exactly.
That host is there, that host is there, and that's
Yeah.
what they look like. They never
Yeah.
look at each other.
Yeah. And when we decided to, when we were first brought together to do the show, one of the first things that A and I said the very first conversation we had was we don't want to be two isolated bodies in a room who are just doing our own thing, and the show, there's many reasons it's called Take Two, but we wanted very much to focus on the fact that there are two of us, and it was a conversation not only that we were having with people outside of our little bubble there in Studio B in Pasadena, but we were also having that conversation with each other, and as we heard A say there, we're two very different people in a lot of respects, but I think that's kind of what makes us interesting. And we have, unlike a lot of what you hear in public radio, kind of forced ourselves to, and I think to our benefit, to take those opportunities to talk with each other, engage with each other, do it without a script, which if you said that to someone who worked at NPR in Washington, D.C., would probably make them hyperventilate. What do you mean? It hasn't been vetted and carefully edited and fact-checked, which is true. But it's much more exciting and organic, and there are moments in radio that you can't have unless you kind of free yourself from those tethers. So one of the things we thought that we would play for you this evening, it's hot off the presses because it happened this morning. If you listen to our show in a little kind of inside the sausage factory of public radio, is that radio works on a clock, right? This is one of the differences between old school radio and future audio, which we'll get into in a little bit. But everything is very much down to the minute. You don't kind of tune in at 9:07 and maybe Morning Edition is there. Those shows air at the same time precisely each and every day. That's what listeners expect. And at the top of every hour is a free-floating minute. And I hope you all go into your cars tonight and tomorrow morning and listen. When it is exactly 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock or whatever, there's a space of time that's created for something affectionately known in the world of public radio as the billboard. And much like the billboards on the freeway, or that awesome digital one that you have there, it's an advertisement of sorts. It tells you what's going on, who we're talking to, and why we think you should stick around with us for a little while. And public radio has done the billboard in a very particular way since before the invention of fire. There is the theme song that was composed by B.J. Liederman. One host says one thing, another host says another thing. They play a little cut of tape. And scene, now news, which is what they always do. And we do that at 9 o'clock. We follow by some rules and standards. We play our theme song, which was done by Oza Motley, not B.J. Liederman. But for the second hour, a while back, we decided to do something a little bit different, which was, well, what if A and I just talked? Which at first I have to say to us, we're like, no one wants to hear that, you know? Like, no, find one story that you're talking about in the hour and just pick something to riff off of, which I have to say, some days is easier than others. But
that's actually the most fun is when we kind of have no idea how we're going to do it.
Also known in the world as pulling it out of your butt.
Right, and that top of the hour, especially at 10, is more of what I see it as. If anybody listens to sports radio, they do a thing on ESPN called Crosstalk, and it's at the changeover of every show. So the hosts from the previous show stick around and talk to the hosts of the next show, and they cross over that top of the hour, because that's when the clock for ratings actually starts. It starts right there. So to keep the listeners from the other show into the next hour, it's important to kind of fill that time. So that's one of the things, at least that's the way I kind of saw that minute for us, is to kind of bring the listeners from the 9 o'clock hour into the 10 o'clock hour, and by not being so rigid about it. So that's how we kind of handle that.
So in today's program, I knew that coming up in the 10 o'clock hour, we were going to be talking about Marie Kondo, who's kind of this, taking the world, everyone's like, oh yeah, Marie Kondo, is the decluttering diva, right? She's got this whole book and this philosophy about how to declutter your home and love your socks, and it's all kind of wild and wonderful. And we're going to be talking about it later on in this show. And so I turned to, and this is usually what happens at roughly 9:58, 37. I'm like, oh yeah, what are we talking about?
This is what. So yeah, when that last segment of the first hour is over, we take a breath for about 10 seconds, and then I look over, I peek over, and say, what do you want to talk about now?
Yeah.
And then that's when we start to plan it.
Yeah.
That's when we start to plan it.
Which we found out actually works. So I said, oh, we've got this decluttering segment coming up, and I'm really excited about that. So let's talk about it. I'll take the lead, which is about how we do it, and we'll listen to the results of that. This is from this morning at 10 o'clock. All right, a little insight into what life is like behind the scenes at Take-Two. If we were to go upstairs from the studio and compared A's desk with my desk, they're a little different, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I've got a carefully placed flash mural, a bunch of different dolls, but they're carefully placed in specific places for specific reasons. You, on the other hand, are like a bomb that's gone off in that little spot of the room.
It's funny because it's true. Yeah, there's a lot of chaos, a lot of books, CDs, stuff going on. You know, I'm a busy lady. I don't have time for this. At home, I'm a little bit better.
Can you sweep once in a while?
A little bit better. Hey, I do. At home I am better, but I needed some help. So we called in for outside reinforcement.
Our studio is the same too. Look at that.
Stop.
Look at
Enough
your spot,
with
my
you.
spot.
This is the joy of radio. No one has to be exposed to this. But coming up on the program, we're going to take a look at the decluttering phenomena that is sweeping the nation.
So cool.
The Marie Kondo effect. First news.
So we got everything in there. I mean, we told you what's coming up. We hit the post, and we had fun. And in public radio, that's something that doesn't happen that often.
If you listen to the, and this is, I truly did not intend for this evening to be a diss NPR session. I have great and deep respect for it. But if you've ever heard laughs on NPR, they're really weird. They freak me out. Ha, 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 ha. You know, you can kind of tell. You hear it, and it sounds creepy. Like Steve Inskeep never laughs like you hear him on the radio. I know the man. He's lovely, and he's got a great sense of humor. But he doesn't laugh like he laughs on the radio, because I think that there's a lot of this thought of like, well, this is how a public radio host is supposed to laugh or supposed to be or whatever. And our philosophy has always been we want to sound on air the same way we sound when the microphones are not on, which I think will be a perfect way to seg into one of the things we're going to open it up, and we've got some students here going to ask some questions, and we're very conscious of being on the clock, and I know we're a few minutes past, so I'll get us there in a moment. But there's a lot that's changing in the world of audio right now, as many of you probably already know. It used to be that the radio that you turned on your car was your only option. Now I'm guessing most of you, unless you drive a 57 Chevy, have other options, even if your car isn't completely tricked out with satellite radio, right? You turn on your phone, you can listen to any podcast, anything, anytime you want. How does that make you feel?
Well, there is a big, and if you've been paying attention to media landscape, there's this war, seemingly, with people who podcast and feel that that's the future, and it is, and people who still feel that podcasting is a fad, and it's going to go away, or it's going to settle down, and are stuck to the old traditional ways of radio. It's one of those things where both can coexist, and that's one of the things that I never forget when people started blogging. The newspaper writers, they were complaining. I was traveling with the Dodgers, and all these beat writers were saying, my newspaper wants me to blog. Should I do it? It's like, yeah, you should do it, or someone else will do it for you. And all these old beat writers who didn't want to blog had people blog for them when they could have been doing it. They could have been a part of everything moving forward. Instead, they didn't. So with this, I always think that it can all work together hand in hand, and there shouldn't be a line drawn in the sand, but there is for some reason. I guess that's with every new medium that there always is that old school versus new school, old guard, new guard. But there is a way to mix the two successfully. It's been done before.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's a really exciting time for the students who are here right now, because you're at the forefront of all of this, and you're going to have the opportunity to create this world and make it what you want it to be. You are the audience, you are the listener. You know best what you want to hear and how you want to hear it. Do you want to hear some stodgy old host who will never giggle on the radio? Or do you want to hear someone who sounds more like you? But the key thing, I think, and I think what will eventually in the end kind of be where we're at when all the dust settles around this, is you still need some of those hardcore, traditional journalistic values that I do think comes from public broadcasting, even NPR, especially NPR, and that come from a program like this school here. So I think it's a really exciting time for you all. I'm jealous that you get to be on the forefront of it, for sure. Just hire us old farts.
Yeah. You get to shape the landscape. One student said earlier that it's an exciting time for him because he feels that he can shape the landscape or help shape that landscape. And with these facilities and this place and all your this is a great place to start shaping that landscape.
Yeah. Ernie said earlier that there will be a test for you listening to public radio, but we don't know what that test will be. I know what our test is Ernie, we're going to bring you in for our next membership drive, man. You're really good.
That was
we
good.
Need to get you
Fundraiser
on that one. That's a small price to pay. You're worth it. Is that notion, public radio we are the business models that we get our largest source of funding from our listeners. I think the real test comes from us. Can we be creating radio where you, even as students with loans to pay and all the rest of it, want to write a check, and yes, we will take $5 a month and we'll thank you with some wonderful gift on $5 Friday, but can we make you feel that passionately about content and about quote-unquote old school radio that you'd want to give and contribute, and I hope that we can do that. So it's a test for us, and I look forward to hopefully passing it. And with that, I believe we're going to take some questions.
With you. Oh, look at that. That's
clock.
really impressive.
We're seriously on the clock here.
Very impressive. I want to introduce a couple of our students who are, what would you call you, radio nerds, maybe? Yes. Yeah, we like that term. One of them, Martha Daniel. Raise your hand. Martha Daniel is a junior, finishing up her junior year. She's a print and digital journalism major. And she is actually, I have to mention this, from Texas, Houston. And she has been one of the firebrands in that room over there that you see to our left. Martha is one of the executive editors of this media center, which means she kind of has a say in the direction of the whole thing. She created our radio magazine show called From Where We Are, which features radio storytelling by students. And she is actually, and she also is a national award winner. She did a piece on online sex work that won a Hearst Award, and she's going to be competing in San Francisco for a national championship this summer. And she's going to be interning at KPCC this summer. And
We'll get you on our show. We need to get you on our show.
And next to her is Kevin Walker, who is a Masters of Science student in our graduate journalism program. And Kevin graduated from the University of Pittsburgh, which is my city, in history and political science, correct? He did some work at KPFK before he came to graduate school. And he is the producer of Storyline, which is one of our podcasts that we do here. And he's also an award winner. He did a piece on predictive policing that won a Broadcast Education Association award. And he too will be interning at KPCC this summer. So Martha, did you want to start off with the question?
We've been hearing a lot lately about how NPR is in big trouble for the age of their audience. And earlier in our conversation, you talked about how KPCC is doing a pretty good job of hitting sort of the sweet spot of audience. It's 35 to 44, you're saying, is like the biggest demographic that's represented. But what do you think still needs to be done in bringing up the next generation of KPCC listeners, of Take Two listeners? What else can you do? What sense of urgency do you feel as hosts to bring up a new listening ear and to guide those people in creating the next generation of public radio?
Well, I think it's funny that you mentioned that, because tomorrow I'm going to be at Cal State Fullerton hosting an event called Millennials Matter, where we just go out and talk to millennial-age people about things that matter to them. And it's a very simple radio tool. It's just reach out to people. That's the one great thing about radio that's always been there since it was invented. It reaches out to people through the airwaves. And I think a lot of other broadcast mediums don't do that as much, or they feel that they'll be found by someone. Aggressively reaching out to the demographics that we're looking for, that we're trying to reach, that's the best way to do it. It's that old tell them what you're doing and then remind them what you're doing. It's an old radio slogan, but it still works today. And it could work. It should work for every single kind of media today. It's just that I think it gets forgotten, and no one really does it as much. So that would be the number one thing, just simply, plain and simple, reach out, connect, and talk to people.
I think it's also about partnerships, which is and I think this is true in just about any industry, but especially in broadcasting. It's about, when people ask me what can you do to get ahead and all the rest of it, one of the things that I say is, be hungry, but also forge partnerships. Realize that it's a very personal, like Hollywood, like in a number of industries, it's about whether people like you and want to work with you. And sometimes I feel that there is this generational gap that happens in public broadcasting of the old schoolers they've paid their dues and they've done this for so many years that there's nothing that anybody else can possibly teach me. And that's a huge mistake. It's just a huge mistake. I will use myself as an example. There is a young woman who works on our staff. Her name is Francine Rios. She's an incredibly bright, talented young woman. She knows about all sorts of stuff that I just don't get, and I don't know. For example, Twitter. I'm there. I say stuff every now and then, but for the most part, I'm just a horrible Twitterer. I don't have that much to say.
Tweeter.
Right? I told you, right? I think both is accepted. A tomato. Anyway, that's, and I have no problems going to her, and we've talked about this, where I'm like, please, show me what I need to be doing. Show me the light. Help me out with this stuff. So in social media stuff, that's great. She gets it. She eats, sleeps, lives, breathes it. There's a lot of stuff that she just doesn't know that much about how to do because she hasn't had that much experience. And how would what would you do if all of a sudden there were a huge earthquake or terrorists knocked out this building or whatever? How do you respond to that breaking news situation? How do you interview, as we were talking about earlier today, a really thorny politician who's not taking you seriously? There's all this experience and life knowledge that even in a world-class institution, it's just hard. I was saying to someone earlier today, it's like driving a car. I could give you a manual that walked you through each and every one of the steps of how to operate an automobile during rush hour on the 405, but until you get in that car and do it, you're not really going to know. So I can take Francine on that proverbial drive and show her, here's how you do this, and here's what I've done in the past that works and what doesn't, and she can show me how to tweet. That works out really well. But those kinds of partnerships are hard to forge, and for the most part, we're just all so busy. Like making radio is hard, and as you've probably learned, like time-consuming. I always love when radio students do their first piece, and it's 3 minutes long, and it took them 5 weeks. You know, it's serious, and you get better, and it gets quicker and easier, but it's a lot of time, so sometimes it's hard to take the time out. But I feel that's one of the most vital investment that any journalistic institution, but especially radio, can make, is partner up with these people, because you have something to offer them, they have something to offer you.
That's what companies, and the other place that I work at is ESPN, and one of the things that they do really well is that when there comes a point where they're kind of lost direction, so they're looking around to see exactly where they can forge a partnership. And Nate Silver, when they brought on Nate Silver, they forged a corner for ESPN for him to be him, but also they took from his brand, he took from their brand. And it's been a good partnership. Bill Simmons, when Bill Simmons first was on the scene, he built this audience that ESPN was like, how do we figure out, how do we get to that? Well, forge a partnership with them. Then all of a sudden his audience becomes your audience, their audience becomes everyone's audience. It's forging partnerships and then allowing people in that partnership to stay themselves. In other words, so ESPN could have told Nate Silver, well, you got to be more like us here at ESPN. No, they let him be who he is. So that's the part about forging partnerships on a bigger level, is that allow the partner that you're with to be themselves and try and take from them as well, because it turns out to be a successful partnership if it works out that way.
Kevin, did you have a question?
So you guys talked earlier about the importance of podcasting and how that's kind of increased. Your show lives online, after you do the broadcast. Do you find knowing that has changed the kinds of stories you run on the show?
So as of now, if we can all promise to keep it within these four walls, yes, you can go out and find us as a podcast. We are not the podcast that I think we can be, should be, and hopefully eventually will be. And this is one of the things that's really tough. You're right. Like right now, if you suck out the breaks and all the rest of it, our show, all told, is about an hour and 40 minutes or so. Who here listens to an hour and 40-minute long podcast every day? I don't think any of you do. None of us have the time. So part of our strategy, which is why what we've done, and I think it is a smart move, is to break off some of the things. A does a weekly sports segment. I do a weekly parenting segment. We kind of branch those things off because they're the bite-sized morsels. And then the people, and I think a lot of what podcasting has shown us, it's about, for the most part, niche listening, right? There are new moms who just really want to absorb parenthood stuff, and that's all they want to listen to is they're walking around with their babies around the reservoir in Silver Lake, right? Or they're sports nuts who want to be brought up to date with, the latest stats and whatever. But I do think that there is a realm in what I've been pushing for, and we'll see if we get there. Because here's the thing about podcasting, no one knows, right? There's no rules that say this is what definitely works or doesn't. There's certain things that the folks who really are experts, is that I just heard the other day from someone, there's a certain, there's an advertiser mark that, I can't remember, there's a technical term for it, that you want like a podcast to be at least 30 minutes because you insert this ad at X time, and that's proven to be the time that marketers show like works best for it. So within those parameters, I think there is room for a take two, but it's not our whole show every day. You're right, like we are first and foremost a local radio station. So if there is a fire or an earthquake or President Obama comes out and makes some huge statement about U.S.-Cuba relations, like we are there. It is our primary duty to be the first to report that to you. Today, if everybody heard the news about Harriet Tubman on U.S. currency, like that broke as we were on the air. So as A and I are yippity-yapping on the radio, Megan's upstairs calling people and finding out who could talk about this and we get it on their air. Does someone want to listen to that at night when it's been all over the news? I don't know that they do. So I think, in my mind, there would be someone who every day would be coming in and looking at our show and developing just the Take Two podcast, which might be 20 minutes one day, 45 the next. It would really depend. I think it would be a danger to our show and our first mission of being on the air to let the podcast rule what stories we chose to do or how we chose to do them. And there's going to be times where it's just not compatible, right? But I don't think that should, I think there is a middle ground. We're just all trying to desperately figure out where it is and how to pay for it, which is the other really big question, right? That's the 600-pound gorilla in the room. It's not a perfect method each and every time, but the whole membership drive, public radio, we kind of know what we're doing. We've been able to survive for quite some time. Podcasting is a really mixed bag. There's so much that's out there right now, you know, and I liken a lot of the times to television, right? In the early days of cable TV, like no one really knew what they were doing or how they were paying for it, and we're still figuring out. And then Amazon comes along and like has all these hit shows and is launching movie studios. The business models are being worked through, and eventually we'll figure out what works and what doesn't. But there's no way that all of these that 5 million podcasts are all going to be able to financially survive and have the same resources that a public radio show has.
And we are aware that sometimes when we do a segment, and I don't know if you've had this feeling, but we end a segment and I'm like, yeah, that could have been a good podcast. Mm-hmm. So we are aware of that, but it doesn't drive how we start off the process. Because if we do that, as Alex said, then we're leaning away from our mission, which is to be a news magazine show that's relevant every day. But after the fact, we do think about, that could have been something that we could add to a podcast.
But tone-wise, conversation is conversation, right? And I think sometimes that's what's kind of missing in podcasting is a genuine, organic, interesting, smart conversation. And sometimes on the public radio side of things, it's too stilted and would never work if you're just like jogging or whatever. So I think that's one of the things that tone-wise, my aspiration is always, can I put it on the radio station and a podcast and it's the exact same audio, tone-wise, but it would work for both audiences. And that I don't think is that hard to do because it's just what we do. And there are plenty of people who don't like it, and that's fine. Because there's plenty of people who do, and I think that goes back to how you get the younger listeners.
We want to open it up to questions, but do you have a question?
Yeah. Is your show something like a feature show? You know, because I had a job that I had in Hollywood for a while, and it was basically like a radio magazine. I started doing 15-minute music shows, and then slowly I transitioned into like reading scripts and doing 2- and 5-minute feature shows, which is just reading from a script from something that people are interested in. So is your show format something like that?
Yeah, that's
that's the best way to find it. 9 to 11, we got to do our shameless plug every day, but it's 2 hours live. It's conversations for the most part. And then also we work within a station that has reporters, and they'll go out and report on news stories. It'll be gathered from the outside world. So it's kind of a mix, a hodgepodge.
My name is Corrine. I'm an alumni. 30 years ago, I can't believe it. I think when we approach the campus as an alumni, we visualize where we were and who we were and how young we were when we were here. When I was here, the great Norman Corwin was one of my, guest speakers, and I was concerned about the history of radio. And as a young baby boomer, we were talking about this earlier, there's these huge gaps. Tomorrow you have the Millennial Show. I heard that advertisement coming in. I drove 2 hours to come here today. I'm worried about the gap getting larger and larger and larger because the history of radio is so fascinating and so important. Is that still taught? Is that still integrated in the conversation? Is it even important anymore on contemporary radio?
Well, I see everyone as a listener, regardless of age. You still have to be interesting. You still have to be entertaining. You have to be informative. So, to me, I think that there's certain content that a younger listener would like more than an older listener. An older one would like more than a younger listener. But at the kind of the root of it all, you have to grab those ears, regardless of what age they are. So, if you're just interesting every single day, we have to do it every single day. But if you're interesting, people will listen no matter what age they are.
I mean, I think the history of radio, there's lots of ways to look at that. I mean, I was saying earlier this evening, when I went to school to learn how to do radio, it was tape. It was magnetic tape that we sliced with razor blades and cut ourselves and had tape in our hair and all the rest of it. And I will be that old fogey that says, I miss that dearly. And I will never forget and then I learned how to digitally edit, and I remember going into a station in San Francisco that I used to work at with the piece that I had edited, and there was this really ornery, angry engineer who I love so much, this just tough female engineer who'd been at the station since the dawn of mankind. And I just remember her looking at me and saying, Alex, you edited with your eyes and not with your ears. Never do that again. And she was right. And I see that a lot of times because a lot of students today, they'll never touch tape.
Right.
Probably no one's touched tape here in well over a decade.
Right.
When you edit using Pro Tools or Dowlet or Adobe Audition, whatever you're using today, people will look to see this is where the word ends or where the breath happens or whatever. That is not your best edit. Your best edit is if you close your eyes and you listen. But who teaches that these days?
It is a big difference in the way you approach it because you are putting a visual into it, which is really nice in a lot of ways because I can in class show, well, you can see your waves are down here and they should be up here, and so it's really nice to have that visual, but you are losing something by not having that focus on what it sounds like, and that you remember those times when you'd have your reel-to-reel and your headphones on and you're going back and forth trying to find that spot to edit. And so it is really a different process now.
And and part of that might be lost forever. I mean, there's no doubt about it, right? The thing that I think will not go away is and I was talking about this earlier today with the students, is why do we love radio? Look at all the things that have come along and almost killed us. Television, XM, Sirius, podcasting, right? There's been so many waves of the internet, right? Like radio's going to be trounced by this, and it hasn't been, right? And I think that there is a reason for it. There is something that radio is able to do that is different, which is why I am passionately in love with this medium. And as I was saying earlier today, when people come in and apply for jobs or apply for interns, I will always hire the one who says, I fell in love with radio, because you can't fake it. And you know that person when you see it, and they had that same experience. And it's usually born out of an experience that couldn't be had any other way. It's like the difference between reading a book and watching a movie, right? You can read Harry Potter, and you know what Hermione looks like in your mind. You could love the movies, but there is something special about what you had in your vision of her. And the fact that radio is something that you do not see, there's many reasons I like that. I come to work in yoga pants most days, and nobody knows. And that's a nice little perk. But there is something about the fact that when I interview someone, you don't know how old they are, you don't know what race they are, you may not know if they're a man or a woman. I love that. The tone of their voice, the hesitation they have. The dad we had on our show the other day, whose young son died of cancer, and he made a video game about it. And you can hear that he never cried. I almost completely lost it. But he never cried, but you could hear how close he was. What print article is ever going to do that? What web piece is ever going to do that? That's radio. That's why I love it. And I don't think that'll ever change, because that's just audio, right? And that can be podcasting too. But I think those fundamentals, like that history of radio, you can't kill that,
In terms of Take Two, the one thing I feel is different about Take Two than any other show. So if you're tuning into KISS FM, you're hoping for a couple of things. You're listening to top 40 music. You're hoping to hear a Bieber song or something like that. Listening to KFI, you're listening for a certain thing in particular. For Take Two, I always feel that it's like an unspoken, unwritten contract that we have with our listeners that they're hoping to get a lot. The spectrum goes from young to old. So in the time that I've been there, I've done an interview with Angelica Houston, one with Tyler, the Creator, one with Padma Lakshmi, the Top Chef host. That's a big range right there. And that's how I think this show bridges that generational gap. And so someone who's 60 can enjoy a Tyler, the Creator interview and maybe listen and hear something they've never heard before. And someone who's 19 or 20 years old can hear Angelica Houston and say, oh, yeah, I remember her. So that's the generational gap that I think this show uniquely addresses for this market.
But you should know, this was at the beginning of our show, which unlike many other shows out there, usually shows take months to develop and pilot and figure out their DNA and their mission statement. We just weren't that way for a number of reasons. And I remember at the beginning, all of the head honchos and people coming up and saying, well, but what are you? We don't know what your show is. And I was one of the people asking that. Like, it used to really bother me.
We were freaked out by that. That really freaked us out.
We need a litmus test. And this just went on forever. And I will always remember a friend of mine who is young and Latino and kind of our perfect, ideal listener, said to me one day, he's like, I love your show. You can just talk about everything. And it just, for me, was this like hilarious epiphany of like, here we were trying so hard to figure out what we were and whatever, and people don't want that necessarily. You know, some people were just really happy to tune in, and it was the roulette wheel. I mean, you know, within reason, we have certain standards, I'd like to think.
Or there was a conversation that I had with Megan Larson, our senior producer, when we were trying to answer this very question about what are we, and she said, why can't we just say that we're an interesting mix of a lot of cool stuff? It's like, yeah, that's... I did. Oh, yeah, there you go. There you go.
You quoted or stole it?
Yeah, stole it. Yeah, probably stole it. It's a radio. I'm a radio person, so I stole it.
You want to?
I want to go back and respond to you from a student perspective now, someone who's an undergrad here. My first semester at Annenberg, I took a class with Dean Wilson and former Dean Jeff Cameron. Cowan, sorry, excuse me. That's a soccer player, Jeff Cameron. But I remember just being instilled with this reverence for the history of the field that we were entering into, and this deep, abiding respect for the rules that have governed the game for forever. But, and I will always remember this, you told us to have hustle and pluck, which I felt was such a great guiding principle from bridging the past to looking forward to the future, and feeling empowered to dictate what our field is going to look like. And I also think that a lot of the time the conversation that happens right now about the sorry state of modern journalism, because I do get that a lot, and I think that a lot of that comes from the idea that we don't have an Edward R. Murrow, we don't have a Walter Cronkite, we don't have this person at the forefront who's guiding us through these horrible tragedies.
Jon Stewart, though.
Yeah, right. But I just think that it looks a little bit different now. It looks like Christian Amanpour. It looks like Robin Roberts, who uses personal tragedy to bring people together and to tell a story. And so I'm just wondering from you guys, what sort of responsibility do you feel to be transparent about who you are and the experiences that you're bringing to your storytelling? Because I think it's a huge disservice to say that you're just a journalist and you're just telling a story.
You don't have to nudge me too far to tell all kinds of embarrassing things. I do it all the time. I think it humanizes you. It humanizes you. Yeah, and there was a time where Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America. But when you do that, though, and at that time it worked. It really worked because America at that time needed television was brand new, and you needed someone to trust. But nowadays, everyone is so transparent with so much that if you don't do that, and you don't have to reveal every little detail about yourself, but if you don't do that, you're not going to connect with people anymore. It's just the way people listen. People want to find out about the people that they're trusting to get their news, their information, and their stories from. And so if you don't give them a little bit, they're not going to give you what you want, which is their ear.
I'll take a somewhat different tack and say when I was at journalism school, I had an amazing professor, a writer named Cynthia Gorney, who's just fabulous. And she said, she's written on all sorts of different topics, but she had just, when she came to teach us, had just finished a book about the history of the abortion debate. Not an easy thing to write about. Obviously a hard thing to kind of divest your own personal feelings, especially as a woman. And she said, but look, here's the thing, when I'm writing this book, if I'm going to present this, and along the lines of the KPCC motto of no rant, no slant, I have to be able to listen to everyone with respect. And she said, the way I knew I had done my job best was when the book came out, all of the pro-choice people called her and said, thank you so much for representing our side. And all the pro-life people called and said, thank you so much for taking our side. Everyone thought that she was on their side, which part of me was like, oh, Cynthia, you're a very cunning lady, aren't you? But I do think it's true, especially when it comes to those hot button topics, which, look, are changing. It is a changing world, right? We know today it is totally okay for me to go on the air and say it is not cool to be racist, right? But go back not that far in our history, and we had segregated restaurants and buses and all the rest of it. Things change, right? Gay marriage was not legal in this country when our show started. It now is. So how do I say, and the day that the Supreme Court overturned that, made that ruling, I have feelings as a human being that exist when the microphone is turned off, but I do think there are certain times where those feelings, they don't get to come out and play. And that's really tough on some occasions. There's no doubt about it. But the thing that I always come back to is I don't want to just do a show for Democrats or just for Republicans or just for white people or black people or gay people or straight people. I want to do a show for everybody. And I can't do that unless I am less than transparent on those fronts about certain things. And it's really tough. Because I'll go online, I'll go on the air and talk about, the ridiculous stuff I did with my kid the other day or the mess that's on my desk or whatever. There's plenty of stuff that I'm like, world, I don't care, check me out. But there's certain personal beliefs that are mine and mine alone. And I think that's one of the fundamentals of journalism that should never change, regardless of everything else.
I think we could take one more question and then we should wrap up. Yeah.
My name is Amber. I am actually an Annenberg alum, and I love listening to your show. Oh, thank you, in the morning. And I was just curious if you can share one of the memorable or favorite stories that each of you has worked on and why it was your favorite or your memorable to work on.
It's always a hard question.
Every day.
They're like children. How can you make me pick one?
That's
after
they weren't on the air.
we weren't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, San Bernardino. After that, we really mobilized really well. And this is just not the show as much as the radio station. It was a local story that was a worldwide story, and I think we really did a good job at reaching out to all the right places and tried to look for ways. And I mentioned this earlier when we were talking to students earlier. It's like every story that's happening right now is over already. So how do you push things forward? How do you see the next thing? How do you project ahead and think about how the story is changing and affecting the area that it affects? And I think that's, with San Bernardino, we did a really good job at kind of just reporting what was happening, because we have to, and also trying to look ahead to see what's coming up next before it happens, as it's happening. So I think San Bernardino was I think we all did a really great job at really capturing that.
Like I said, there's so many babies, and then I get so excited every day. I'll be like, oh, that guy was so, I'll come upstairs and be like, Megan, that guy was so good. Give it 15 minutes on tomorrow's show. And then we have to hack it down to 8, and those things happen. I will say, just because it's one of the things we haven't talked about, but I think it's a really important part of journalism, and I think it's an often overlooked part of journalism, is live events and live storytelling. Which is something that I kind of can't get enough of. I started off originally thinking I wanted to be an actress, and I did a lot of theater, and then I switched gears. And that's, I think, of all the forms of journalism, the reason I like radio is there is this it's acting, and it's reading, and it's voice and diction, and all the rest of that. And I feel like, especially in this day and age where so many of us are glued to these devices, and everything's in short little snippets, and we don't have human interaction, I think there is a huge market right now for opportunities to connect with people. And at KPCC, if anybody listens, we just had a brand name change that I'm still getting used to. We used to be called the Crawford Family Forum. It's now called In Person. But we have this event space where we bring in all sorts of different events all the time. And we did one a while back that Megan shepherded that was about women in comedy. And we had Lorraine Newman. If old school Saturday Night Live fans remember, we had Jenny Slate. We had this amazing comedy duo named Frangela and a hilarious performance artist named Christina Wong. And we just talked. We did a lot of what we do on the radio, and eventually it went onto the radio. But we were there in person and doing this, and maybe it's because, I'm in yoga pants and it's early in the morning and I don't see anybody. There is something about it's like live theater as opposed to being a movie star, right? Sometimes it's just really nice to be in a live theater where you can hear when people laugh. If someone laughs at something that we do on the radio, or they get angry, or they gasp, we never know. And I do think that just given everything that's going on in the world, there's a hunger for that. And I think if it's something that you as aspiring journalists and storytellers think about, is think about that, because I think that there's a lot to be done on that front. I think that's kind of part of the new frontier of journalism, and that's what I like doing best. I'm jealous you get to go to Fullerton tomorrow. I get to stay in studio, but I get to go out.
The world's oldest millennial, so that's why they.
Yes, that's right.
Well, thank you both so much. We like the beard. We like the short hair. Thank you so much for being here and for all of your comments and for being so generous with the students.
Thank you.
Thank you.